Hey, Larken Rose here, and the topic of this video is people being triggered. And what I mean by that is the all too common these days phenomenon of people getting emotional and defensive and offended and freak out and have tantrums and sometimes literally just screaming tantrums and trying really hard to not hear another person. And you see it a lot in if Jordan Peterson tries to say something, or like anybody who isn't basically a Marxist trying to speak on a university campus about anything. You know, Ben Shapiro, and like there's a long list. And most of them are statists, by the way. I disagree with them. But I'm talking about the strange phenomenon where people think it's an illustration of their virtue and their righteousness that their thinking brains shut down and they become emotional, blubbering piles of complete idiocy. And it's interesting to note how common that is now and how people wear it as a badge of pride. Like, it used to be that if you get all emotional and stupid about something, people go, whoa, like, calm down, pause, think, can we have a rational discussion about this? And now people are glorified and like praised for completely losing their marbles and not being able to actually have a rational discussion. Because if you're a good person, then any ideas that don't fit the agenda of the leftist control freaks is hateful and intolerant and racist and homophobic and all sorts of things. And so I thought I'd make this video, and by the way, this video will totally trigger people because I'm going to use an example, one of the most common examples of something that completely triggers people and how ridiculous it is that that's the reality of the situation these days. So by comparison, I'm going to jump to the extreme and say, consider the example of like a serial killer cannibal or something. Like there's some town and people just found out, oh, there was this psychotic serial killer and he just got caught and there's like pieces of people all over his, house and stuff. Like as dreadful as you can get. How many people are going to be like personally offended? No one. Now, hopefully pretty much everybody will be creeped out and grossed out and think that's dreadful and that's horrible and that's... But is anybody going to be like righteously, I'm so offended that you would kill and eat your neighbors, I'm simply not going to talk to you anymore? That's not the response anybody would have. They would recognize the evil, I hope, and say, yeah, that's horrible. They would condemn it. They'd point it out and go, that's dreadful and insane and like, ugh. It's kind of terrifying to think that anybody is messed up enough to do that. But the whole, I'm so offended, I'm not even going to think about it, doesn't make any sense. In fact, there's a bunch of like documentaries about various serial killers which sort of look into the minds of these psychos and like, what on earth? Like, what's going on in their head that is their behavior? And for a lot of people, and sometimes even me, it may be too creepy. And it's like, I don't even want to think about people who are that screwed up. And you don't have to. You're not required to. But being like offended that they killed and ate their neighbors, like the worst thing you can possibly be, the worst thing you could possibly do. Well, we'll throw in some torture to make sure it's the worst thing you could possibly do. People aren't getting like righteously offended about it. They're horrified. They point out it's evil and insane, as they should, but they're still able to talk about it. Now, compare that to a topic where literally people have been trained to be unthinking, emotional basket cases and respond with nothing like actual thought. So, given that I just started with the example of a serial killer, I'm not saying that if you can rationally talk about something, it means you approve of it in any way. So what I'm about to bring up, when I talk about actually having a discussion and examining it, if you're one of the people who go, well, you must appreciate it, or you must approve of it, or you must agree with them, That's exactly what I mean by people who don't know how to think. And I'm going to use the example of racism, which triggers all sorts of people. So I'll start with sexism and a version that's acceptable that nobody gets triggered by. It is pretty much an indisputable fact, I don't think anybody out there would disagree with this, that statistically speaking, men commit way, way more violent crime than women do. Does anybody, I don't need to cite sources. I think everybody's personal experience and all the crime statistics, everything demonstrate that the vast majority of violent crimes are committed by men. Now, when I say that, being a man, do you hear that as, oh, did you hear what he just said about men? No, I'm sure you didn't, because it's literally the statement of a statistic, a fact. Like, I don't take offense to somebody pointing out that fact, because duh, it's just a fact. It doesn't mean I'm violent, doesn't mean I'm going to be violent. I'm an individual, I belong to a demographic category, men who commit way more than half of the violent crimes. That's just a reality. Now, can we talk about why without people flipping out and go, oh, you just hate men, you're just an intolerant, hate-filled, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, of course we can. Well, there's the testosterone, you can look at evolutionary influences. Well, they were sort of the warriors and they fought and conquered each other, so they tend to be more physically aggressive. And, there's 8 million papers and discussions about that all over the place, and nobody gets offended by people having a discussion about that. So, if you move that discussion, and I know it's going to trigger people to even have me say, if you move that to discussion to the concept of racial statistics. And if you say, the statistics seem to show that a disproportionate percentage of crimes based on the percentage of the population are committed by particularly young black men. Now, you can say, I don't think that's statistically true, and argue about the numbers. Okay, like if you have an argument there, you can do that. But if you accept that that's statistically true, which lots and lots of data shows, does acknowledging a fact mean people should get emotional and freak out and decide that you're racist and horrible? No, that's stupid. It's just as stupid as if I freaked out and got all offensive at somebody saying men commit most of the violent crime. Yeah, they do. Like, that's not an affront to me. You didn't just accuse me of doing that. Like, yeah, I'm in that category, whoop-de-doo. Like, I know the statistical reality. So let's walk through what an actual rational discussion could be with people on both sides. And again, I'm not saying that understanding somebody's point of view and why they think it means agreeing with them or thinking they're right. Like, almost nobody agrees with me politically because almost everybody believes in government. But I can still try to figure out exactly what they think without it being me condoning it. So imagine that there's some grouchy old white redneck somewhere, and he sees this statistic that says, percentage-wise, young black males commit more crime than the population in general. And his conclusion is, well, that's because those gosh darn Negroes and their blah, 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 blah. That's the conclusion he reaches about those statistics. Now, I think he's totally wrong, and I'm going to get to why I think he's totally wrong in a minute. But there's obviously like a basis to make a connection between those two. Like, if those are what the statistics show, it doesn't surprise me that some people would decide, well, it's because of their blackness. I think that's dumb. I think that's wrong, and I'm going to get to why in a minute. But to think you're an evil person because you looked at the statistics and went, well, it looks like that group is more likely to be violent, like less civilized or something. And if that's the thought process in his head, what part of that is evil? You can say he's stupid. And if he goes around like attacking black people based on his guess of some statistical patterns, that's really, really bad. But let's say he's just some grouchy person who just, mumbles racist insults. Is that the worst thing in the world? I don't mean is that bad. Yeah, it's stupid. It's collectivist. It doesn't help society. It doesn't, there's lots of ways in which it's negative. But is some grouchy redneck saying racist things, is that the worst thing in the world? Is there really a reason for anybody to get just emotional tantrums in response to some old racist being an old racist? If he's not attacking anybody, he's just mumbling under his breath and occasionally chatting with other racists, in whose life should that be the primary concern? If I was a black person, somebody over there is saying nasty things, okay, that's obnoxious and stupid and maybe a little bit insulting. Do I have to completely lose my shit and get all emotional about the fact that somebody I don't know over there might have these stupid thought patterns? No, you can just go, oh, that's what they think. And plenty of black people think that way. Okay, yeah, they're racist idiots. And when they're openly racist, but they're not violent, you just sort of laugh at them and go, okay, whatever. You can think stupid stuff. It doesn't hurt me what you think. And it doesn't hurt me what you say. But the fact that there is now expected to be an emotional, violent response if somebody uses the N-word, that's a trained-in response. Who's benefiting from that? Because it's a word. It's not a nice word. It's never meant as a nice word. I mean, a white guy yelling that at a black guy, it's meant as an insult. It's supposed to be, instigating and offensive and all that. It's still just a word. And people will say, well, except there's all these years of blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but that's not that guy. That guy just said a word. And he's being a jerk. You can say you're a jerk. But the fact that people are expected to get completely emotional and even violent in response to a word, who benefits from that? Who benefits from pushing the idea that getting emotional and losing your shit and being completely emotionally triggered by a word is a useful or necessary response instead of just going, well, you're an idiot, whatever. Going on my merry way, knowing that you're an idiot. I'm done. Who benefits from the trigger thing? Now, it isn't just racism. There's, all the trans stuff going on that people are so eager to take any opinion they don't like and go, well, you're a transphobe, which, by the way, is a really stupid term. When somebody sticks phobe on it, phobe means fear of. And if somebody says, well, I don't really like that, to magically decide that that's fear, that's just being stupid and not able to think clearly. And the idea that you hate people if you describe things a certain way. There can be people who say, well, I think two guys can get married. And there can be other people who said, well, my religious beliefs and stuff or whatever lead me to believe that marriage is between a man and a woman and not a man and a man. Is that hateful? No, it's a belief. It doesn't have to be hateful. It doesn't have to be, and you're going to burn in hell. If they add that on, then you can laugh at them and go, that's stupid. But if they just say, well, here's what I believe the word marriage refers to, deciding that that's hate and getting all emotional and having tantrums about it is just stupid. You can think they're totally wrong, but assigning evil intent to them based on them just saying, well, I think that word describes this. And it's the same thing with the trans thing. If somebody says, I think the terms man and woman are terms describing a biological reality, not what somebody feels like. So if you're born biologically a male, I think you're a male. Somebody can say that. Somebody can think that. That's not hateful. That's what they think those words mean. Somebody else can say, well, I think how you feel is really the determining factor of whether you're a man or a woman. And they can think that, and they can say that. Is there really a need for violent, nasty tantrums on either side about that? If nobody's using violence, they're just saying, well, I think it's mean, I'm not going to call that person a man because I think they're a woman because they were born a woman. Oh, that's hateful and intolerant and that's violence against me. No, it isn't. But again, who benefits from people being triggered and freaking out against other opinions that didn't come from malice? Or even the racist thing that kind of did come from malice. It's still like, well, if that's what somebody thinks, that's what they think. So, but it's interesting that it only applies in certain situations because the agenda is only pushed in certain situations. For example, when I was in federal prison for a year for not sending pieces of paper to the IRS, there was a guy there, a black guy, who spoke about the white devil. And basically everybody white is evil. And he never threatened anything. He just talked about it. And the funny thing is we had some fun chats. And I didn't actually bring up, wait, why are you chatting with the devil? Aren't I the devil too? Or did I get an exemption card somewhere? I think his thinking is ridiculous and silly and collectivist stupidity in exactly the same way as the white redneck going, oh, there's gosh dang Negroes here. It's the exact same stupid. It isn't just analogous. It's the same stupid thing is you're taking a huge group of people and deciding that they're all a certain way. And I think that's stupid, but I didn't have to get triggered and offended and get all emotional and have my brain shut down and smoke come out my ears. I literally just chuckled at it. And by the way, when I was in there, I was the minority. Because, as lots of people know, especially at the federal level, most people in prison are in there for victimless crimes, usually relating to drugs. And in that case, a lot of the people in there were black and some Hispanic and stuff, often from like Philadelphia, which is the nearby city, and Pittsburgh and other places because people get moved around. So most of the people imprisoned with me were black or Hispanic, non-white. So I was the minority for a year. So the fact that, oh no, that one guy said this racist thing and there's all these black people around me. Well, they're not all saying that. One guy, well, maybe more than one was saying it, but not in front of me. And nobody threatened me, nobody attacked me. We got along fine. Peaceful coexistence among people who were basically victims of the state. So should I have gotten all emotional and freaked out at somebody who's obviously basically taking the group I'm in and saying, you're evil? Or should I just go, yeah, that's dumb. Like, I don't have to have a tantrum and writhe on the floor and pee myself over the fact that he has a dumb belief. Well, why is there a requirement to freak out over, like, the redneck who has that belief? Now, let's look at that belief, because somebody's own experience, let's say this redneck somewhere, the only time he lives in Whitey McWhiterville, and the only time he's even met black people, it was like some black punks out vandalizing his property. Now, this is a stupid way to think, this isn't logical, but if his entire personal experience with black people was negative and scary, and this is also true of like kids growing up, like a white kid in a black neighborhood or a black kid in a white neighborhood, if their personal experience was every time I actually had, some interaction with that category of people, it was bad. Therefore, my brain associates that category of people with bad stuff. That's a perfectly natural reaction. Now, if you're a thinking human being, hopefully your thinking brain can step above that and go, yeah, but I only interacted with 0% of the people in that category. So to decide that anybody else who looks that way must be the same, that's stupid. It's stupid in either direction, whether you're saying it about whites or blacks or men or women or anything. And incidentally, you see that a lot. You'll see, some bitter men going, oh, women are lying. No, they're not. Like maybe you had experience with a number of women and now you're projecting that onto how many billion women in the world? That's stupid. And there are women who say, oh, men, everyone is bad. No, some of them, yeah, and maybe the ones you've had experiences with. But for you to extrapolate that to the entire population, or all men, or all women, or all whites, or all blacks, or all Jews, or all whatever, it is just a demonstration that you don't really know how to think. But nobody needs to get emotional and defensive and just flipping out and losing their shit based on the fact that somebody else reached a stupid conclusion. Now, if you ask me, and I know I brought this up a while ago so people could be all triggered and on edge, there is a higher crime rate among blacks in America than among the rest of the population. Now, you can argue about the exact statistical things. I don't think it has anything to do with them being black. I think it has a lot to do with cultural stuff, which was a direct result of government policies that were trying to do that to the black family, trying to split it up, trying to not have fathers be there, trying to get them dependent on a welfare state, trying to keep them down, trying to train them to think that being black means being uneducated and stupid and loud and celebrating gangsta stuff. Like, I think that was a deliberate choice and an effort by some in power to make that happen. Now, if somebody else thinks, well, it's just because they're black, I can say that's stupid, but I don't have to flip out. Now, that's all the way, by definition, racism. But even that, like that term, you're a racist. First of all, they throw that accusation at everybody. Like, people who are actually racist, you don't have to try that hard to find that out. Like, you might have to get them where there isn't a crowd around so they feel comfortable saying what they think. But actually racist people don't try that hard to hide it. But like, oh, you said something that somebody could misinterpret. Okay, let's look at the actual concept of racism. Because there's a few things that can mean, and nobody talks about it because they just flip their lids and freak the hell out. One is expectations of a certain group. For example, I expect, as a general rule, Jews to be pretty good with money. Obviously, there are exceptions, but the culture, in general, stresses being responsible and good with money. Now, is there something hateful about that? First of all, that's kind of a compliment. But is there something hateful about stating a statistical reality as applied to a group? No, and for anybody to go, oh, how could you say such a thing? How could you be so weak-minded and so easy to manipulate that you will, on command, get emotional and freak out at somebody just discussing patterns of behavior? Like, I started with the fact that most violent crime is committed by men. That's reality. We can talk about why. We can look at the statistics and, well, how much is age a factor? How much is this a factor? How much is upbringing a factor? Like, the lack of a father in the home is a gigantic factor in suicide rates and crime rates and, all sorts of negative things. But if you can't get to that discussion, if you're unable to have a rational discussion, even about opinions and beliefs that you think are stupid or malicious or even abhorrent, then you're the one shutting down your brain and incapable of thinking. Like, if we can think about serial killers, like, wow, what's going on in their head? Is it that difficult to think about, like, racism? It's like, what's going on in these people's heads? And what do you even mean by that? And I've seen, like, Jordan Peterson try to break things down, and people just flip out because, no, that's not something you're allowed to talk about. You're only allowed to get emotional and flip your shit and get triggered by any mention that has anything to do with it. Otherwise, you're evil and hateful and racist, and to the point that the term doesn't mean anything anymore. Because if somebody sees patterns in racial groups, like Jews, generally speaking, tend to be better with money, or Jews are, as a percentage of the population, very overrepresented in politics and banking. In other words, a way higher percentage of Jews get into those professions than other categories. Now, is it evil and hateful to point that out? No. Is it evil and hateful to say the people in politics are evil bastards? They're parasites. They live off of robbing everybody else. Does that magically become evil and hateful and anti-Semitic if you also notice, oh, and a pretty big percentage of them happen to be white? No, that's stupid. I would also point out that a pretty huge percentage of federal representatives are male. And if somebody says, I hate the ruling class, they're violent, they're evil, they're doing nasty things, and most of them are male, should I go, oh, you're blaming men for blah, 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 because I'm a man and now I'm offended and triggered? No, because I'm not one of the ones in office trying to rob everybody. And yes, it is a statistical reality that men are way overrepresented, statistically speaking, in federal politics. Like by a lot. It's actually changing, which I don't think is good or bad. It's just like, I don't think it's an improvement. Now the people robbing you and lying to you and enslaving you are diverse. There's men, there's women, there's different races. Now you can be enslaved and abused by a wide array of people who look different. Okay, that's not really an improvement if you ask me. And I will still judge the individual for the individual's actions. But if somebody can just point out statistics and patterns, like Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams, both of whom were black professors. Well, Thomas Sowell still is. Walter Williams passed away. I had the pleasure of shaking Walter Williams' hand a billion years ago. I think it was right near the end of me being a statist. But Thomas Sowell just goes into great lengths, an economist, professor, writing books and studying all these cultural things that you're not allowed to talk about. So, like, I'm sure today, if he tried to, like, speak at any normal university, everybody would just pee themselves and decide, you must be, like, a black, white supremacist and all kinds of stupid stuff, because they're incapable of pausing to think about it. As soon as they think, I disagree with something, their reason shuts down, they get triggered, and their emotions take over, and they become babbling idiots, and they openly will scream at people like, you're hateful and blah, 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 and I'm not going to let you speak, and I'm not going to listen to you. Who does that benefit? If you're one of the people having a tantrum, do you think that benefits you to not understand your enemy? The thing is, if you understand them, you might figure out, oh, they're not actually my enemy. But assuming they are your enemy, assuming they came to your university to give a speech about how evil black people are, like anybody would get invited to a university, assuming they're actually overtly nasty and racist and horrible, even in that situation, does it benefit you to not understand them and not hear them and not know what they're actually saying? No, that's stupid. Like, I've gone to great lengths to understand statism in all its various forms, even though I disagree with it. Because you can't argue against something if you don't know what it is. But this whole triggered pattern of people being literally trained, including by universities, these centers of knowledge, they're not centers of knowledge anymore. They're centers of emotional idiocy when it comes to these issues, because nobody there is capable of having a discussion and thinking. Well, it isn't quite nobody, but a lot of the people having the tantrums, it's like, how about shut your mouth, pause your tantrum long enough to listen until you actually know what they're saying. You can still think it's wrong. You can still think it's evil. But who benefits from you not even knowing what you're complaining about? And that's the thing that all these triggered woke leftists are trying really hard to not notice. If somebody wants you to get emotional and not hear what somebody else is saying, why do you suppose that's the case? Do you think it's for your benefit that they're saying, don't listen to those people at all? Just get mad and feel all virtuous and righteous, screaming at them and calling them hateful, even though you've never heard a word they said and you have no idea what they think. Does that benefit you? No. Who does it benefit? I'll give you a hint. There's a phrase called divide and conquer. It's been around forever. It's ruling classes figuring out, if these people get along, if the peasants are fine with each other, how am I supposed to control them? If I come along and say, I get to rule you all, they're going to go, no thanks, go away please. But if I can make them hate and fear and be at odds with each other, then I can go to this group and say, if you put me in power, I'll protect you from them, or I'll put them in their place, or I'll legislate this, that, or the other thing. And then they go to the other group and do the same thing in the other direction. If you're triggered and rightfully emotionally angry at all the hate speech, you are nothing but a pawn of the worst people in the world. You're not being anti-hate, you're being anti-thought. Because there's nothing about pausing and thinking that means you have to be in favor of the other side. That's just trying to understand it. Why are they saying these things? And now there's more and more people who started by being programmed, emotional, fragile, snowflake, triggered tantrum heads. And then somewhere along the way, they started to notice this doesn't exactly make sense. And then they started to listen to other points of view. and go, oh, they weren't saying they hate us. They were describing this thing, and maybe I agree with it, and maybe I don't. But to paint them as, oh, you're just utterly evil, and I'm going to lose my shit if you try to say anything, you're being played. You're being played, and it's not by good people. Good people are not going to try to train you to have irrational emotional outbursts, even at evil. Even at the worst things you can imagine, the worst ideas, the worst opinions, all the way nasty stuff. So let's take the example of all the way some, they completely overblow, like the nationalist white supremacists. Yeah, there are some of them, like 3 or something. Like the media wants you to think it's all over the place, it's half the country. No, it wasn't. Like people wouldn't have to worry about the most, innocent comment that somebody could misconstrue in some stupid way. If this were actually a white supremacist country, it wouldn't be hidden. It would be in your face, and it would be really nasty. There have been those. Nazi Germany was one of them. Even in those cases where somebody's like, we need to preserve our race and blah, 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 and our nation and blah, 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 blah. And there are a few of those people. Even in that case, does it help you to just get emotional and lose your shit and get triggered? Or would you rather understand, why do they think this? Not, now I can sympathize and empathize and they're totally right. Because you can disagree with them just as much when you're done figuring out what they think and what they advocate. Listening to them doesn't equate to now you think they have a valid point. It equates to trying to understand what the hell is going on inside their head. And if you're not trying to understand what's going on inside the heads of your enemies or opponents or adversaries or however you want to view them, if you're not even trying to understand that, who do you think's benefiting? Who do you think that serves? It's like in a chess game. If you have an actual opponent, I want to defeat you. I'm not going to look what moves you do. I don't want to understand your game. I don't want to understand what you're doing. Your game is just hateful. I'm just going to move my pieces blindly, not even knowing what I'm up against. Could anything be more stupid? Could anything be more counterproductive? If you're up against actual nasty hatred, is there anything you could possibly do that would be more idiotic than make sure that you never understand where your enemies are coming from and what they actually believe and what they're planning to do? Nope, that's about as dumb as you can get. So all those people who think they're being righteous and brave and virtuous by being triggered and emotional and screaming, you're hateful and intolerant, you're this phobe and that phobe. You are being played as pawns by the worst people in the world. And they're playing both sides. But if somebody wants you to not be able to hear an opinion, take 2 seconds to think instead of just getting triggered by me pointing this out. Take 2 seconds to think, why would somebody not want me to understand what the other side is saying? How weird is that? I want to know what my enemies think and what they're planning and how they function. Doesn't mean I'm going to agree with them any more than I did to begin with. But all of this woke crap where people freak out, you're canceled. What does that mean? We're not going to listen to you anymore. In no case is that an intelligent move. In 0 cases. Even if they're all the way openly, we think all black people are horrible and we should send them all back to Africa. The dumbest racist position you can possibly think of. In no case does it benefit you or the truth or righteousness for you to go out of your way to not know who you're talking to or what they believe. That's you choosing ignorance. And it's somebody else encouraging you to choose ignorance, to choose to not have any idea what you're talking about or arguing against. The people who want you to do that don't give a shit about you. You are pawns to them. You are pawns to be used for their political agenda. And if you fall for that, being all woke and eager to cancel this, that, and the other thing, which means I'm not listening and I'm not... That isn't for your sake. They're not doing that for your sake or for the sake of virtue or tolerance or getting along. It's the exact opposite. you are falling for the divide and conquer that is the same root of the racist dumbass, the white redneck, black people should blah, 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 blah. Or the racist black idiot, the white devil, they're all evil and... No, you're just an idiot doing collectivist groupthink. All of that comes from the same divide and conquer crap. And all the people who think that getting triggered is an expression of how virtuous they are and how much they care about love. No, it isn't. You're just a gullible idiot falling for the deceptions and manipulations of the worst people in the world who are trying to make you be at odds with everybody else. And luckily, more and more people are seeing that. But just thought I'd do this video to trigger some people and to point out, if you're that easy to trigger, you're just a useful idiot for the worst people in the world. You're not being virtuous. You're not being rational. You're not doing any good. You're not convincing anybody of anything. You are incapable of convincing them of anything because you don't know how to talk to them because you don't even know what they think. You're going up to people trying to explain their position like, well, here's what I believe and what about this? And you're having a freak out tantrum and condemning them. They obviously know that you're not listening and you didn't bother to find out what they think. You think you're changing their mind? You think you're making them feel bad about what they believe? Like, well, I'm looking at these statistics. You're horrible and racist and evil and this is hateful and intolerant. You think anyone's going to go, oh, well, then never mind. You're accomplishing nothing except feeding the divide and conquer that the worst people in the world are trying to accomplish. And it's just pathetic to watch. So maybe next time you're going to be triggered and emotional and stupid in response to something, pause. Pretend you're a rational being capable of controlling your own emotions and try to understand what the other side is actually saying. Actually try to understand it. Doesn't mean you'll agree with it. You might understand it and go, yeah, it's still messed up. It's still stupid. It's still evil, but now I understand it. Or you might go, oh, that wasn't actually hateful or evil or malicious. And yeah, there are some points there I hadn't heard before. Maybe somebody who wants me to be triggered didn't want me to hear about those ideas. And luckily, that's happening more and more. But not enough, because there's still a bunch of idiots having tantrums and thinking it's virtuous to not be able to think. It isn't.